know what to call this. I guess we could call it 10-12 overtime, 10-12 extra kick. But the concept of just having some bonus material outside of the normal Monday, Thursday podcast schedule. Obviously, Mondays we recap the weekend, and Thursdays we make picks. Uh, Make sure and check out this week's. I just every once in a while it's like I need to fit some other interviews in here. And so throwing them only on YouTube made the most sense. And so I'm very excited today to have someone who's been on the show many, many times. As you can see, the hair's in a bun. It's not the beautiful flow like it was while I was watching you on the college football show on YouTube with our good friend Gary Seeger. He is, of course, Parker Fleming, aka Statsowar on Twitter, the man everyone loves to hate but still ask 1,000 questions and requests of. Parker, welcome back to the show, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Yeah, I was letting the hair flow on the pick show. I had a rough spot a couple weeks ago and had to shake things up, and they've been going well, so I'm rocking with the flow there. But gets a little cumbersome in my day to day, so toss it back up in the bun after the show.
It's I guess that's a better way to like keep a good streak going is just to let your hair down as opposed to like I don't know
Yeah,
eating something weird or
right.
so not terrible. Okay, so the reason I wanted you here today is I think most people who know you are very aware of the different graphs and metrics and things that you post on social media in regards to college football. Um, you are all over the place with a lot of different things going on, and so I wanted to sit down and look at a couple of different things that you post on a regular or that people share of your work to kind of help everyone understand exactly how they work, what they're trying to tell you, what we're trying to learn from them. Because obviously, people see some things, the first one we're going to talk about here in a minute, and go, what is this? This doesn't make sense. That's wrong. We won that game. How could you say this? One of my favorite things you do every week, and I'm going to see if I can get the screen share to work because sometimes it works for me and sometimes it doesn't. And so we'll find out if this is going to work or not. Is the did we really get beat that bad graphic that you post, which looks at some of the games and asks the question, did the outcome of the game, did the final score of the game line up with how the game actually went? And I want to pull up this week's because it is very interesting to me specifically to look at the West Virginia Iowa State one. And obviously, for those who don't understand, far right is you beat them bad, it's real ugly. Far left is the team this was the winning team, but this was the team that outperformed, which is wild and crazy and awesome stuff. So first, let's just start with the basis of how did this start? How did this come about? And what are some of the metrics that kind of go into this graphic that you put out each week?
Yeah, I'm the biggest fan in the world of like what's the stupidest, simplest answer I can give about a football game that's informative. And so I think net success rate is really answers the question well of just like what happened in this game. We know the final score is super noisy. We know that there's, 60, 75 plays, sometimes 40, depending on who you're playing. And kind of what happened in those plays doesn't always correlate to the final outcome. There's the obvious ones like kickoff return touchdowns that really don't have any bearing on offense or defense efficiency. There's turnover scoops and scores. There's random bounces of the football. And so stripping things down to look at net success rate just kind of takes some of the noise out and presents a view of how these two teams compared in really the down to down business of playing football. Games are, won and lost with the explosiveness, the special teams, the turnovers, and et cetera. And net success rate really just kind of shows us how close were the margins outside of that. So it's a good diagnostic to really look at a game and learn something. It's a starting point. It's not a decisive answer. The did we really get beat that bad is just a funny way to kind of couch this, but it is just saying, hey, did you have a positive net success rate and you lost? Let's identify what went wrong. Like, were those decisive plays sustainable? Are those going to carry over? Same thing. If you had a huge net success rate and you didn't win by much, where might you have failed to take advantage of good situations or made mistakes that affected the score? How's that going to tell us about what you're going to do going forward? And if the net success rate is super even and it was a blowout, for instance, we can look at that and say, oh, what was the difference really in this game? It wasn't the down and down business of moving football. It was something else. What can we learn about a team based on that? So it really is not a decisive answer so much as a starting point, but it does still give you a really good perspective on average.
I always think of when I get ready to come look at this, a couple of games in my mind each week of like, I can't wait to see what this one looks like on Parker's graph when it comes out because I'm curious if it fits what my eyeballs told me, right? And so using last week's as Big 12, for example, obviously BYU smoking Arizona, that lines up with what I watched on the field. BYU handily beating Arizona. The one Arizona State in Utah, that was not that close of a game. It didn't feel like. I know it seemed like it early on. I recall watching Cincinnati and UCF. It felt close. The one that I wanted to bring up specifically to talk about in reference to this was West Virginia, Iowa State, where based off of this graphic, West Virginia outperformed Iowa State. But as we saw in that game, Iowa State won from a point standpoint fairly handily. And watching the second half in a low possession game, there were what, eight total possessions like per team. It wasn't a quick game. It was a slow paced game. How does this view that West Virginia was able to outplay Iowa State, despite the fact that my eyeballs, when I watched the game, said no, it was close early, and then Iowa State kind of dominated for the next three quarters.
Yeah, and so looking at this, again, small margins of error, less than 5%, success rate is going to be noisy down to down. But we know a couple things matter. One, Iowa State had a 60-yard touchdown back to Jalen Noel. So that was a three-play drive there. And so that's gonna, that's 7 points for only three successes, right? That's a pretty big payoff there. So the explosives, one, are gonna again kind of throw things out there. Additionally, you start to look at West Virginia. They, moved the ball very well in their first drive. And their second drive, they missed a field goal. So that's a bunch of successes and no points, right? Which contributes to the final score, but doesn't reflect, hey, they were moving the ball decently. And then they punt again, after converting, what was that, two first downs on that next drive, and then they go another 10 play, 50-yard field goal drive there. So that's three really good drives that they only came away with 3 points on. And then so that's 14-10, pretty dead even game at halftime. You look at the second half, Iowa State goes punt to start. West Virginia moves the ball pretty well, goes punt again, but then they throw an interception after 57 yards. They throw an interception on two plays as well after Iowa State scores to make it 21-10. And then Iowa State moves the ball on a short field after that interception, only 33-yard touchdown. You don't need a lot of successes to get in the end zone from a short field. And then West Virginia at the end goes 11 plays, 67 yards for what is effectively a garbage time, but not technically a garbage time touchdown to keep that there. So you add in, let's take away one of Iowa State's touchdowns for the interception. We believe that's kind of fluky. They're not going to get the short field consistently. That's 21-16. You add in a missed field goal. And that's 21-19 right there. Now we're talking about, okay, Iowa State had a big play touchdown and then basically played even with West Virginia the rest of the time. Does that mean that Iowa State wasn't the better team? No. Does that mean that, Iowa State didn't really win? No. Does that mean that I don't think Iowa State's going to be good next week? No, I picked them to cover versus UCF just a couple minutes ago on the BetUS show. What this means is that when we're looking at where the margins were, there were some special teams plays, there was a couple of explosives, and there was a turnover that really were decisive in West Virginia. So it's more so like, how did West Virginia lose? Well, it wasn't that they couldn't move the ball, it's that they couldn't finish their drives, right? They were inconsistent and moving there. So what this shows is kind of two things. One, the margins in football are slim. You make a couple of mistakes, you're losing by two scores. That's what's happening in kind of competitive conference play. But also that there are these high leverage spots that contribute a lot more to the final score that aren't going to match with the play-to-play level indices because there is so much variance in a football game.
It makes sense and explained in that way that you break it down by remove this, remove this. And I understand that those things happen and the score is the score. We're not sitting here saying like, well, West Virginia should have won that game or Iowa State wasn't as good as the final score indicates. Like Iowa State made the plays, West Virginia made the mistakes, and Iowa State capitalized and continues on an undefeated season. And West Virginia is hoping that they can find some magic this weekend on Saturday night against Kansas State. So I appreciate the breakdown. I want everyone to kind of think about that. To look at this graphic on Twitter every week. It's fun. It is a fun graphic to see. If you take it too seriously, like go touch grass, take a breath, have a drink, coffee, water, whatever is your particular flavor, and just enjoy the fun things. Unless your team sucks.
I will point out and just take this opportunity to say there's always one fan base every year that's extremely passionate, and it always makes me really interested because. And this year it's BYU because BYU is kind of a team that's outperforming their metrics. It's always somebody who's who's worse than their record, and it just happens in the Big 12 every year. And what's funny to me about this is it's not distinct to a specific fan base, but when it shows BYU having a negative success rate and still winning, they share the ever-loving heck out of it. They're like, "This guy sucks. This is terrible. Whatever." When it shows BYU having a positive success rate in a blowout, they're nowhere to be found, and so it is a conduit for some nonsense. And I just would you look at it in the whole season, it's actually a pretty good reflection of kind of who is good and who is bad compared to their schedule. But there is an imbalance. It definitely gets more hate shares than it does positive shares for sure.
What's the saying? bad news is still good news, right? There's no such thing as bad publicity, so we'll take it.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know what?
Absolutely.
Share the word, angry or not. Go ahead and spread the gospel that is Parker Fleming's. Did we get beat that bad? Okay. Next thing I want to talk about is, and I've seen a lot of obviously I use the collegefootballinsiders.com matchups. We use these numbers that you post as part of our pick show every Thursday. We run through our list of T-Shoe Index and Beta Rank and SP Plus, and we mentioned Parker on the show. So if you watch the pick show, this is where we go and get it against the spread and the total numbers that I mention each week when we go through the games. And so, but you also have these really good. You used to post them on Twitter, and now you've got a website, and these look beautiful. And so we're gonna see how screen share goes because most of the time it works okay, and sometimes you know things hate me. I want to use the Colorado Arizona game, a classic Big 12 matchup here that we're going to discuss today, to kind of go through this sheets because I've seen people just tweet, screen grab, or share these sheets out on social media as well, and I'm hoping that they all tag you. I assume most do, and sometimes we forget. Everybody gets one, right, Spider-Man? So I want to use Colorado, Arizona as a point of reference here to kind of break down what some of this is because there's a lot of initials, there's a lot of abbreviations, and there's a lot of stuff that can get a little bit confusing unless you spend a lot of time with it. But I think it's all very interesting. And while it doesn't promise to guarantee you this is the outcome of the game, nothing is a perfect, nothing's a promise. And as we just talked about, there are intangibles and things that happen, special teams plays, turnovers that you cannot account for. But for the things that you can account for, which is why, again, I think this is all interesting. I kind of want to go through here. So we look at Colorado, Arizona. Colorado, you have projected as a roughly 2.5 point favorite. I think the total is around like 50. I don't actually do math. I don't math. The 54. I think that's right. What I'm interested in here, color grading, most people should know, blue good, red bad. When you look at this, how do I take this information from EPA margin and net points per drive and this stuff, and how does that translate to the projected points in the win probability?
Yeah, so basically, some of these are more important than others. Some of these are measures of style. And it all comes back to, I mean, everything comes back to like Bill Conley's five factors, right? Like, what do you think are most important? Efficiency, explosiveness, finishing drives, field position, turnovers, right? Like that's really hard to argue that those are the most important things in college football. How you measure those is where you get some juice out of a model and how you put those into a model and kind of spit those out. So you've got to account for opponent in college football. And so I do display the opponent adjusted numbers this season for anything EPA on here. So EPA margin, offense, defense, EPA per rush, EPA per dropback. That's expected points added, translates yards to points in context, helps us understand how explosive and efficient you are. And those are really driving a lot of the score projections with some special teams, some opponent adjustment, and some preseason priors in there as well, just to help us ground kind of where a team is. Although generally through about 6 games, we kind of know what a team is historically. So that's kind of where I start to look at is the EPA margin is a net efficiency. And it's just kind of like on balance without knowing what you're better at, offense or defense, how good are you? And so you see Colorado's about 39th overall, Arizona's about 32nd. EPA generally favors offenses more than defenses. It penalizes defenses more. And so you can see Arizona's a little stronger on offense, even as their defense is a little worse than Colorado's. That offensive difference is so big that it's kind of driving their efficiency overall. And that's why they're ultimately a couple of points in expectation better than Colorado on the play-by-play. But you start to break it down to the facets, and that's really where the modeling comes in. We're going to split in a run and pass, and we're going to see that Arizona has been better in the drop back than they have in the rush. If you go down to that second box, it says Colorado defense versus Arizona offense. Arizona's offense is 27th in EPA per drop back. Colorado's offense is actually 30th overall. So it thinks it matches up really, really nicely with them. And their run game has faced a little bit of higher volume. That's that RROE, rush rate over expected. But they've held up pretty well at 40th in EPA per play. So basically, the model takes those sub factors that it can be a little bit different than net EPA per play, because again, we prioritize offense and we prioritize passing offense over rushing offense. And so those two differences are really where you see the biggest divergences between the net EPA per play and then the points projected overall.
Rush rate over expected. Explain what that stat means.
Um, so rush rate over expected is just simply the idea that if I count how often you rush, I'm not accounting for the fact that like in 3rd and 1, you're going to run a lot. And 3rd and 10, you're going to pass a lot. Like that's just the situation dictates some of that. As teams get bigger leads or later in the game, they're going to rush based on game state as well. So I count for all those things in a simple, just binary model that, separates into rush or drop back. It accounts for scrambles. So scrambles are passes because those are designed rushes, right? And says on average, how often do you rush relative to an average team? And so that gives us some meaningful differentiation compared to just percentage of rush because it talks about your tendencies, not just the descriptive facts of how many times you rush. It's saying, what do you prefer? What's kind of your strong hand? So you can see on offense, it's relatively straightforward. Arizona minus 9.3 percentage points. That means they're passing a ton. They're 10th in the nation, very pass heavy. Colorado, even more pass heavy, 14.1 percentage points more than average passing there. The defensive side is where it gets a little wonky, but it's still very interesting. Think of it as how teams attack you. And where it's really, really beneficial, and I think we can see an example of this right here, there's a pretty decent split between Arizona's run defensive EPA and their dropback EPA. 65th to 52nd, right up there. Yep. But you can see that they're 18th in rush rate over expected. Teams are passing against them a whole lot. They really want to they really want to attack that drop back passing defense. And it's possible that their run defense is in fact overstated because they're only facing rushes in kind of those obvious rush situations, which will favor the defense. The 3rd and short, I know it's coming, is easier to defend overall. And so you can see some selection issues there with the rush rate over expected. Really at the extremes, it's super informative just to say, what are you trying to do and what are opponents trying to do to you? It's a single number that kind of just on the merits helps us understand how our team's attacking you.
Uh, it's awesome. I love it. This is so fun. If you have not been to collegefootballinsiders.com and checked these out, you should. If you want to preview some matchups, like let's say I wanted to say, how about this? Let's just type in Iowa State. I gotta Iowa State and BYU. Let's say that's we're going to generate that matchup because that could potentially be our Big 12 championship. And if you want to see as of today, based off the stats, what a projected outcome for this game would be, ooh, that'd be fun. 25. Ooh, yeah, that'd be great. So, collegefootballinsiders.com, great place to go and just play around. Check out matchups each week. I would absolutely advise it. This is a rabbit hole you can fall down for a while if you just get bored or have some time at work or you'd rather do something else. Okay, I do want to talk just a little bit of Big 12.
Yeah.
You brought up BYU. We just pulled up the fun graphic for BYU. BYU, one of the two surprise teams in the Big 12 conference this year. I'm not going to say that you have been negative towards BYU. It's just that there is something to the stats say that BYU has not been is not as good as their record upholds. There definitely a difference between home and away. We had Greg Werble on the show on Monday, and he raised some great points about BYU. Of not only are they 6-0, they're 6-0 against the spread. They have the biggest spread winners. I think they're plus 17 right now, which is the biggest number of anyone in college football. So like, there's a lot. Part of that has way more to do with Vegas than it has to do with just on the field success rates, and we understand all that. But it's interesting to look at BYU and say, let's stay away from the word lucky again. Forgive me, it's Football Outsiders does luck rating ratio, and I think BYU is like number 3. But what is it about what BYU where you say they're not as good as they seem, but this is why they're having success this year?
Yeah, I mean the defense. I think I went on ESPN in Salt Lake with Ben Criddle on Friday, our buddy over there, and talked to him about some of this too, and just kind of saying where it is. I think the biggest thing is just like the offense is not great. It's fine. It's 50th overall in EPA per play, 31st in the rush, only 46th in pass. If you'll call back to earlier in our conversation, we know that passing offense is really the biggest thing. We're talking about being nationally competitive. We're talking about not are you going to win the Big 12, but are you going to compete in the playoff here, which is kind of the great filter for Big 12 teams historically. But the defense is really great. 14th overall, 17th against the rush, 4th in EPA per dropback. Now, that being said, I have controlled for opponents, but the SMU win, for instance, has aged super well. But that was not a good SMU team when they played them, and I think that's a little bit over leveraged there. That again was a very losable game that SMU just did not win. The Baylor game in the second half, BYU committed several mistakes to give Baylor an opportunity to come back in, and Baylor couldn't take it. I think if you substitute that SMU team and that Baylor team with an average Power Four team, BYU's winning at best one of those. And so again, that not to say that like they're not good, just again, we're trying to predict their performance forward. And we talk about what was sustainable and what's not. You go back to the Kansas State game. I think you would agree with me if we play that game 100 times, 86 of them Kansas State's going to win, and Kansas State is not going to commit that 2 minute stretch of three turnover ball that resulted in 17 BYU points before you could, blink. That game was fumble, touchdown, interception, and then a touchdown for BYU right there. Just a 14-point swing that Kansas State just never came back from, and Avery Johnson kind of crumpled a little bit. That's great. That's what you want from your defense. You want to be able to impose that. We can't count on that type of performance happening to everyone every week. And Kansas State's really the best team that BYU has played. And so again, you say, all right, they played two okay teams and gave them opportunities to come back. Those teams couldn't take advantage of it, which is, again, credit to BYU's defense, but also not super sustainable going forward. And then the best team they played, pretty fluky 2 minute sequence there at the end of the half that we don't expect them to be able to replicate against other teams. So it is this kind of, and it's the argument I had with Gary Patterson every day for years, right? This like defensive heavy team that doesn't have a great offensive identity is not going to be sustainable in the long run. Does that mean that BYU is not a good football team? No, I think they're about 23rd in the nation. I would have them ranked right now, obviously. Um, but it does mean when we start to compare them, not against the Oklahoma States, sorry for the dig, the West Virginias, the Kansases, when we compare them to the Georgias and the Alabamas and the Texases, we don't think that performance is going to be sustainable. So I would just say a thought exercise, and my claim about BYU is very mild. I think they're second behind Iowa State, almost tied with Texas Tech for probability to win the Big 12 right now in my mind, is less. Hey, are they? It's less the idea of like, hey, are they actually good? And more so, when we're thinking about playing Texas, if they don't get two random interceptions and 14 points off those two interceptions against the Texas team, what would you make the final score? Like if you knew in advance those things weren't going to happen, and then you ask yourself, how materially can BYU affect the probability of those events happening? And that's where you get to the conclusion I'm at, where, hey, 6-0 is 6-0. It's nothing to sneeze at. They've won the games. That's what you want to do. When we talk about them comparing them to other teams nationally that they may never even play in a hypothetical exercise, that's where we start to come in and say like, they've outperformed their record a little bit. I don't think they're as good as they've shown. And there's potential reason to believe that in a playoff, they wouldn't succeed to the level that their record indicates that they have succeeded during the season.
Unless, of course, those playoff games are all played in Provo at night, in which case, just take BYU the whole way. Okay, a couple other questions, and then we'll get you out of here. One, which team at this point in the Big 12 did you look at and say, seems like they're struggling, would you say isn't out of it? And when I say out of it, I mean Big 12 title race. I mean, I know we have Iowa State. They feel like they should be the favorite, and I think they should be right now. BYU hasn't lost yet. Kansas State has the one loss, but again, Provo at night, folks, it is what it is. And Avery seems like he's figuring some things out there. Colorado's got two losses. Arizona's not good, but we won't touch Kansas, Houston, or Oklahoma State. But is there a team in the Big 12 right now that is behind the pack, but you feel like isn't actually out of this race?
Yeah, I mean, I think Texas Tech, that almost lost, that maybe should have lost to ACU, is sticking with them a little bit in terms of perception. I think that they're a little bit better. Obviously, they're third in the table right now. I think they're actually a pretty solid team and putting together, some consistent performances as well, even as they do have a loss that I'm sure they regret. Arizona State, if Levitt's not healthy, it's hard to see how they succeed necessarily there, but they've got great vibes and they're kind of filling the role of the smash mouth team I thought UCF would as well. So those are two teams I think are kind of out kicking their coverage. Obviously, Kansas State's still in it. The one I would highlight and the one I've had to revise my priors on most of the season, even more than BYU, is Cincinnati. I think Sorsby has looked great. I think they have some legitimate dudes at wide receiver, and that defense has been very, very annoying. Cincinnati playing very well. They're 4-2, 2-1 in the conference. They have, a little bit of a Herculean effort to really get there. But I'd say in terms of teams that are underwhelming that aren't out of it, Cincinnati's absolutely one that I think you need to be talking about when you're talking about the Big 12 championship.
All right, that's our first big Cincinnati plug. So they're going to have an interesting spot this weekend with Sam Levitt no longer playing. Cincinnati getting Arizona State in. We'll talk about that on the Picks Pod, of course. Parker, man, as always, it is an absolute pleasure. We're going to get you on the Picks Pod this season. I'm trying to get everybody whose stats we use on to make picks with us. So we've got a few weeks left to do that. Man, you do so much in so many places. Plug it all, everything you want. You can plug whatever.
Yeah, just follow me on Twitter at statsowar. Make sure that you are subscribed to the BetUS College Football Show on Tuesdays and Wednesdays. I know, Phillip, you're in the chat all the time and share that a bunch. We really appreciate that. That's a good time with Gary and Kyle over there. Those are the two main places. And then you can check out features at NCAAinsiders.com. Huge shout out to developer Nick and the guys over there for helping me get that stuff into a website. We have so many plans with what we want to do. Just getting the data out there first was really a huge step. And this offseason, we're going to cook and create some really cool stuff over there.
Very nice. Everybody, you heard where to go and what to do. The YouTube show is awesome. I usually have to pick up the girls from school on Tuesdays, but Wednesdays I'm in there. It's fun. I'll be the Big 12 sicko making you talk about Houston and Kansas.
I love it. It gives me an excuse to talk about the Big 12 games. There's no other reason. So,
Oh yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Parker, as always, man, it's a pleasure. Thank you very much, sir.
Cool. Thanks, man.